first off, can you just explain what an active shooter incident is, and sort of the square rectangle situation there between active shootings
Sure.
and mass shootings?
Mass shootings, mass killings. And that's really why I wanted to come on your podcast, because you deal in kind of facts and figures somewhat. And that's really great, because everything has to have a why behind it. What's the real numbers behind it? Because this is such an emotional problem that everybody has. They're so emotive about it's such a visceral,
and understandably so.
We need to do that, of course, right? Because you're talking about, kids killed in Uvalde and parishioners killed in the South, in South Carolina, and people who are just grocery shopping up in Buffalo, and suddenly this is going on. So it invokes that visceral feeling in all of us. But in order to solve the problem, we really have to have a better understanding of the real facts and figures. So first, to answer your question, mass killing, mass shooting, active shooter, all those different things. I think we start with something simple like serial killer. Oh, what's a serial killer? Serial killer is somebody who does the same thing, but they kill this guy and then they kill another person and then they kill that lady. And, we try to find a serial killer because they're going to repeatedly kill people for whatever pattern. And serial killers generally kill a person or two people, right? So you don't see them in these numbers when we talk about mass killings or mass shootings. So under federal law,
I actually had a serial killer in my neighborhood not long ago, which the police, I always thought it's kind of funny because usually the serial killers get their names from like the media, but the police called this guy the shopping cart killer because he would dump bodies in shopping carts. They caught him, thankfully, but
we try not to use those. We hate to not. We now know that it's probably not good to put those little name monikers out there because then people say, look, that's me. I want to be that guy.
But there's an FBI definition for serial killer, and there's an FBI definition for active shooter. There's not necessarily enough, and for mass killing, right?
Mass killing is a federal statute, but there's no definition. You're right. There's no definition for mass shooting. Now, mass killing is defined as 3 or more people dead, which could even be the shooter. And that's a federal law that was passed.
And they changed it from 4 to 3, didn't they?
No, let me explain that. I love that you asked me that, because people say all the time, 4 or more, 4 or more. Mm-hmm. So if you take those terms that we're talking about, there is a federal definition for mass killing, 3 or more. That's the only time the federal government has identified that 3 or more as a mass killing. And it was really a statute passed, signed by President Obama, passed after the Sandy Hook shooting on the Investigative Assistance Act. Think of the name of it, the Investigative Assistance Act of 2012, or 2012. And that was to give the FBI and DHS authority to help in these kinds of killings, these mass situations. So any situation where there's 3 or more killed, the FBI and DHS can come in at the request of the locals, and it's a scope of authority. They're protected because they're doing their job. Because as a federal agent, I can only do the jobs that I legally have authority. That's why we're special agents, because special as a lawyer, I can tell you it means limited. If you're special, it means that's a limited authority, where local law enforcement has authority to keep the peace. State and local law enforcement, tribal law enforcement is keeping the peace. The FBI's authority, the federal government's authority for their agents is special, meaning that it's limited. So the Investigative Assistance Act gave us that 3 or more. And what happened is, and serial killer is, the FBI actually did a research project years and years ago in the 90s that said, we'll look at 2 or more. But there's no federal definition for it. But the FBI did a research project on 2 or more people killed and said, any case where we think a person committed 2 or more killings and we think they were serial killer from a behavioral aspect. So then fast forward to active shooters and all these mass shootings, and the media begins to, and I'm not knocking the media at all. I'm just saying they have to articulate what's going on. They are saying, there's this mass shooting or this mass casualty event. We have a hurricane. It's a mass casualty event. We have a shooting. It's a mass shooting event. So mass shooting becomes quite the common term that's used. However, and then what happens is some agencies, some think tanks, I can name a handful of them, were saying that the FBI says a mass shooting is 4 or more. And because that comes from the original research that the behavioral people did on serial killers, where they said we're not talking about any mass shooting situation. There are other researchers who are doing research on mass shootings. Some of them use 4 or more. They literally said it that casually. And then people picked up out of that the FBI thinks it's 4 or more. But the FBI has never, ever done any research on mass shootings and identified it as 4 or more. But if you look that up online, everybody would say it.
Yeah,
so
and
really,
it gets very confusing, all these definitions, I think, for people, because then for a long time in media, you often had mass shooting meaning 4 or more killed in the same incident, and there'd be caveats too for, if you look at the Mother Jones tracker, the Associated Press's tracker, and we had Professor James Allen Fox on previously on the podcast, and he was a great guest and gave a lot of insight too. That's another good episode for people who want to learn more about this subject. But they tend to exclude things like gang violence or robberies, because those are different situations in a lot of people's mind than Uvalde or the Buffalo grocery store mass shooting. So, I think it gets really confusing for people. And then those definitions aren't FBI definitions. Of course, FBI focuses on active shooter, which is a different situation altogether. Well, not a different situation, but it's a different way of looking at these events, right?
What an active shooter, federal definition for active shooter, an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a crowded space. Mm-hmm. So an active shooter is a subset of what we would think of as mass shootings.
Right.
So if that helps.
Or it's kind of broader, really, because you don't actually have to have shot anyone in theory. To be counted.
I think that, you're right. I mean, it isn't actually broader, because a mass shooting is a shooting. It's not a mass killing, right? So I think that's the confusion, right? An active shooter can be no one is killed at all. It is the idea that there's this shooting in public that a lot of people could potentially get killed. But a mass killing, the Department of Justice in the last 2 years has said we need a real definition for mass shooting. And I actually put one in my book based on the Department of Justice conversation. And it says, it's very similar to an active shooter, but it doesn't have the active part, right? So a mass shooting is when more than one person is killed. A mass shooting is when the same thing like active shooter, where you have somebody who's coming into an area and kills. So, and kills a number of people. And let me distinguish off what these would be. For instance, a family murder suicide in a home, right? And a husband is angry, he kills his wife and 3 kids. Yeah. Then he kills himself. You have an entire family, they're killed in a home. It's not an active shooter, but it's going to come up as a mass shooting. Yeah.
And that's actually the most common. And when I've examined the numbers personally, like that usually accounts for more than half of those 4 or more people killed at the same time events. They don't get the same sort of coverage that, public random shooting does, but they actually happen to be, if you're looking at numbers of 4 or more killed or 3 or more killed, if you look at, the gun violence archives tracker, they give a much more extensive, breakdown of these things. And that's what you'll find is most of them are the situations you just discussed, which are still obviously horrific and tragic. They're different, obviously, than what happened at Uvalde, though. I think to me, that's what a lot of the problem you get to in media when you're trying to discuss these topics, because the mass shooting counters most media outlets use now are 4 or more people injured in a shooting, which is extremely broad and encompasses a ton of different types of shootings. And most of them are likely, criminally involved shootings, robberies, gang altercations,
or murder,
drug
suicides.
Sales. Sure.
Right.
And so these are different things.
It's a completely different problem to try to solve, which is why when I was at the FBI, the FBI's initial research on active shooters, I co-authored why I asked my team of analysts and my other agents, and I had local police officers working with me, why we wanted to pull this subset, because we know what causes gangs, and we know gang shootings, and we know what causes drug shootings, and we know what causes murder, suicides, and familial issues, domestic issues. What we didn't know is what is this subset of these small, what it was at the time, small shootings. When I started, the first 7 years of our research from 2000 to 2006, we had an average of 6 shootings a year. Last year, using the exact same criteria as your listeners would know, the FBI said there were 61 shootings using the exact same criteria, 61. So we went from 6 when I first started to 61 a year.